Perhaps thank you very much, Steffi. Perhaps not a speech, but a simple welcome to this very important and timely virtual roundtable on the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe, with our host today and also shadow rapporteur on this legislation, Pernille Weiss, member of the European Parliament and board member of SM Europe. Thank you very much that you are here today and that you're sharing your thoughts and your work with us. I think you are really also in this context inspired how to make Europe more resistant, but also how to help SMEs in this context. I was reading also your article on Euroactiv. I think we have to see how we make this also working for business, because innovation is coming from the private sector, and I think we have to make them stronger and not to make them weaker. And I think this is a very important point. Health first, of course, but we will have a better health with strong companies in Europe. And so I give you now the floors to the opening, please.
Good morning, to everybody, and thank you for being here, and also thank you for the warm welcome, Dr. Heinz. Yes, indeed, it is a very important strategy of the package of industry strategies. The pharma strategy, seen from my point of view, is actually the most important one. It was on the agenda before the corona, but now because of the corona crisis and also the political discourse around the crisis, it is even more important that we have a fruitful debate on what are actually the market mechanisms that can enable us to be, and that's my aim of my work as a shadow on behalf of the EPP in ITRE committee. It is to design a strategy that enables EU to be the most attractive place in the planet to drive, to develop, to invent, to consolidate the pharma industry in all its sizes and varieties along the value chain, because of many obvious reasons, because of security and health and quality of life, but also because of the economy that the pharma industry is giving to society, both in good times and in bad times. It's a very stable market, also for the revenue to the states, and also it's actually an indicator of the European society. I mean, you cannot have a world-leading pharma industry if you don't have good schools, if you don't have the most excellent universities, the best innovative cooperation in between sectors, actors, countries, etc., that always tries to improve the efficiency and the quality of both, of course, the pharma that is in focus right now, but the whole span of services and products that goes under the hat of the life science. So that's my ambition, coming also from a past in nursing and being an advisor in the public and private healthcare sector for many years before being a member of the parliament. That is what I very much look forward to talk with you about, and also to listen to what you are of course telling us, but also the maybe small debates we will have for the next good hour's time. Also because we are having a deadline for the amendments to the industry strategy Monday afternoon. So my staff and I are sweating, although I have put myself in a better shape visually just for this event. But it is very hard work right now, also because I guess all of you have seen the draft for the industry strategy that we had a debate about yesterday afternoon in the industry committee in Brussels. And it's, to be honest, I can live with colleagues being on the other side of the moon, seen from a political point of view. But that said, the draft is very much out of scope, and it's almost paranoid in its suggestions for amendments and paragraphs. So it's a bit up the hill. So I also know that my team and we will be listening very, very carefully to bulletproof our sample of amendments that we are putting forward to Monday. Also, I would like to underline that I hope to hear in the debate today, not only addressing the pivotal aim to the strategy, namely to make EU the best place to have pharma industries to grow, but also to invite on board the business opportunities not yet seen for the many SMEs and entrepreneurs in Europe. Because we do have, both in the pharma and the digital sector, some issues in EU where we are still looking at how to scale up businesses from the very nerdy laboratories and to the giant enterprises and the many both jobs and entrepreneurs and business types in between those ends of the scale. So I'm also very much listening out to hear ideas for the strategy in order to build maybe a business grid that can catalyze the many potential SMEs opportunities that are also a part of the pharma strategy. Thank you so much. I look forward.
Thank you very much, Ms. Weiss. I think you gave us really a honest and brief and then very practical opening. And I think this is the EPP approach, to be pragmatic and practical for the best in the interest of the citizens and no ideology. The results must be good. And I think this is, we appreciate very much your work, because this is really, to listen is for politics very important, but not everybody can listen. So I think this is a very good approach. So I pass over now to our partner today, the European Healthcare Disruption Association, or today I have to warm in my guild, to Monica Depois. And please, the floor is yours.
So yeah, thank you very much. First of all, honorable member of the European Parliament, Ms. Pernille Weiss, for having taken the initiative to host us here, as well as to SME Connect. Indeed, as you already stated, this comes at the perfect point of time, as the pharmaceutical strategy is discussed everywhere at many different events. And yeah, and this comes at hopefully what we will see as the end of the COVID pandemic. And we have learned a lot of lessons during this pandemic. It has shown the strengths, but also the weaknesses of the pharmaceutical supply chain. And I think we have to take up the learnings from this and use it to improve the healthcare system. Healthcare was not very important previously, but nowadays it's really on the top of the agenda of not only national, but also European and international decision makers. And yeah, we are very happy to have brought this panel together. You have 5 representatives of the pharmaceutical supply chain, or the healthcare value chain, as we would call it. And most of them are SMEs, so we can really highlight and pinpoint what is important for you and to bring forward in the amendments. And I would like to perhaps start to quickly introduce the 5 panelists to you, before then handing over to them for their different contributions. Starting with Ilaria Pasarani. Ilaria is the Secretary General of PGU, the organization representing community pharmacists in Europe. And previously, Ilaria was in charge of the Food and Health Department at BOIC, so the European Consumer Organization. And in her previous function, also a member of the Managing Board of the European Medicines Agency. Secondly, we have Bernd Grabner. Bernd Grabner is our president. And in his day function, he is a member of the board of Jacobi GM Pharma, one of the 5 full-service healthcare distributors in Austria. Then we will move on to Mathieu Huard. Mathieu is Director Corporate Public Affairs at Sanofi, and he previously held several other positions in the company, from market access to health economics and outcomes research. And he is a pharmacist by training. Then we'll move on to Mr. Søren Møller, and I think I don't need to introduce him to you. He's a managing partner at Novoseeds. Søren joined Novoseeds in 2011. And Novoseeds identifies, builds, and invests in innovative Nordic startup companies founded on science and with the ultimate goal of developing products that can transform patient treatment. And last but not least, we have Mikas Rimantas. He's a business development director and co-founder of Lexano in Lithuania. And also his company is an SME. Each of the panelists will now try in a couple of minutes, we said 5 to 6 minutes, to outline the positions, and then we'll also turn to the audience. And for our panelists, you're also encouraged to ask each other questions, or perhaps otherwise address them to Ms. Weiss. And then without further ado, I think I would like to hand over the floor to Ilaria for her outline. And
yes, thank you, Monica, and good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to participate to this very timely and important event. And I would be really honored to share with you, in a nutshell, the community pharmacist perspective on the EU pharmaceutical strategy. So for those of you who don't know PGU is the European organization representing the professional bodies and the pharmacists association from 32 European countries, so within the EU, but also a little bit beyond. So we represent 400,000 community pharmacists across Europe and the 160,000 community pharmacists across Europe, with contact with patients every day, of course. So I will present you what we consider from our side the most important priorities within the pharmaceutical strategy, which, as you know, include the many actions, but I will focus, of course, on the ones that are relevant from the pharmacist perspective. And the first and most important one for us is to ensure greater access and availability of medicines for patients. We think there is an important role that the European Medicines Agency should play in the coordination of member states' activities for the prevention and management of shortages, in collaboration, of course, with the heads of medicines agency, because for us it's very important to maintain, of course, the competence for medicines also at national level. So we see an important role also of the National Medicines Agency. But we also think that it's vital to ensure effective compliance with the EU and national legislation related to public service obligation for all the supply chain actors. And if deemed necessary, given that the European Commission indicated plans to revise the existing legislation, we think that this could also be clarified in the context of the revision of the pharmaceutical legislation. We also think that it's important to develop a fair and effective redistribution mechanism for medicines that are available on the European market to those patients who need them the most, regardless of where they live, especially in crisis like the one we lived and we're still living with regard to the coronavirus, but also in relation to Brexit, which, for example, had a significant impact on the availability of medicines in small markets like Malta or Cyprus, for example. This with regard to the European level, and we know that the EU pharmaceutical strategy, it's mostly about what the EU can do. But from our side, we think that it's also important to take initiatives at national level, starting by increasing transparency and timely communication on shortages to the affected stakeholders, including pharmacists, which in some cases do not receive information in a timely manner, and this prevents them from the possibility of finding solutions for patients. We also believe that national pharmacy organizations should be closely involved in all the strategies related to the monitoring, the prevention and management of shortages. Some countries are more advanced and involve the pharmacist associations, while in others the collaboration with the supply chain stakeholders is less structured, let's say. And a very important message that I would like to bring to you today is that it's important to extend the scope of pharmacy practice to better manage shortages, because all the initiatives outlined in the EU Pharmaceutical Strategy, including reshoring some of the production back to Europe, are important, but they would take a lot of time to be implemented, while community pharmacies can, as of today, already find more solution and better meet patient needs if they're given the legal tools to do so. For example, by replacing the medicines that is on shortage with a suitable alternative. We also think that it's to increase patients' access to medicine. Some medicines that are now only distributed within hospitals can be distributed also via community pharmacies. Just to give you an example, in Portugal during the COVID crisis, pharmacies were given the possibility to dispense medicines which were before only available in hospitals. And patients were very much satisfied with the service because of the longer opening hours, because of the proximity. So this experience, which was linked to COVID, showed to bring an added value for patients, and we would like this type of changes, this type of flexibility to be maintained also after the pandemic. With regard to the affordability of medicines and with regard to the ensuring the sustainability, the financial and fiscal sustainability of our healthcare system, we think that also community pharmacies can play a role and in ensuring the rational use of medicines. But to do that, community pharmacies need also the support from a remuneration point of view to implement cost-effective pharmaceutical care services, such as, for example, medication review that improve therapeutic adherence, for example, and also reduce the risk of side effects related to the use of medicines. We also think that it's now or never. We need to invest more in primary care. The COVID-19 crisis showed that we have to move away from a hospital-centered care to a patient-centered care. And to do that, we need to invest more in primary care, because it brings value for patients, but it also improves the sustainability of the healthcare systems. Just in the interest of time, I will not go through all the points, but we think that an important pillar of the pharmaceutical strategy is linked to the digitalization of the healthcare system. And in this context, we think that it's important to support the active development and the uptake of the EU health data space to leverage the potential of big data and artificial intelligence across Europe. And also there, community pharmacies can play an important role. They can use this information for more personalized services and treatment to patients. And we think we need also to use this information to have more evidence-based information on issues related to therapies and to optimize the use of and then the safe use of medicines. It's also important to facilitate the production of big data in healthcare via linking the electronic records with e-prescribing system, so allowing all healthcare professionals, including community pharmacies, to be involved in patient care and to have access to all the necessary information, of course, with the patient consent, to be able to treat the patient safely. From our side, I would also like to stress that it's very important to ensure the interoperability of information system across Europe to foster the exchange of information also between community pharmacies. Another important priority for us, and I conclude because I see that my time is almost over. Another important pillar of the pharmaceutical strategy, which is a priority also for us, is to reduce the negative impact of pharmaceuticals in the environment and also to combat antimicrobial resistance. And in this respect, we call on policymakers to maximize the contribution that community pharmacies can make to tackle antimicrobial resistance by encouraging the prudent use of medicines at national level, and so involving community pharmacies in all the action plans to tackle AMR and also improving vaccination coverage. We see that in some countries, for example, community pharmacies are allowed to vaccinate, while in others there are still some resistance to use the wide network of pharmacies to increase vaccination. But we also think that it's important to assure funding of pharmacy-led disposal and collection scheme for medicines at national but also regional level. In some countries like mine in Italy, the system is regionalized. because this can offer the public the opportunity to correctly dispose their leftover or expired medicines. And we think this is even more important when we speak about the disposal of antibiotics. We also think that it's important to reduce pharmaceutical waste caused by leftover medicines by ensuring that systems are in place to encourage the dispensing of quantities of certain risk medicines matching exactly the duration of the treatment, as much as possible at least. We also think it's important to invest more in research to fill the gap on the potential negative impact on pharmaceutical in the environment and the links between the presence of antimicrobials in their environment and the development and spread of some diseases which are resistant to the available antibiotics. I think that this is in a nutshell, let's say the most important priorities within the very wide range of actions outlined in the pharmaceutical strategy. So I will stop here in the interest of time, but I will be happy to further discuss with all of you and to respond to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilaria, for having stayed in the time frame and for sharing your priorities with us. I don't see any questions in the chat yet. Perhaps we then move on to the next contribution. And Bernd, would you please go ahead? I think Steffi will share his slides, please.
Yeah, that was my first question. Also, Horst actually stated in his introduction that GIRP is a disruption association. Pharmaceutical wholesalers actually stand for the continuous supply of medicines for European patients. That is my first statement. Thank you, Horst, for this introduction. And a few words about myself. Monica mentioned that at the beginning. I do run SME myself. So we are a family-owned wholesaler based in Austria, cover about 15% of the Austrian market. And I think especially when it comes to pharmaceutical wholesaling, there are many small and medium-sized enterprises throughout Europe in our sector. So the interest regarding the pharmaceutical strategy is a very, very big one. Maybe a few words about GIRP, about our association. We represent more than 750 pharmaceutical wholesalers in 34 European countries, running 1,260 warehouses. A pharmaceutical wholesaler on average supplies 100,000 different products. And in total, pharmaceutical wholesalers throughout Europe supply 15 billion packs of medicines a year, or 62 million a day, from 3,500 manufacturers to, Ilaria mentioned that before, more than 200,000 pharmacies and healthcare professionals across Europe. And just to give you a feeling about how we work, what we do in our daily work, there is an average of 2.5 hours from placing the order by a pharmacy to the delivery to the pharmacy. So I guess there is no other business that is so quick in micro-logistics than the wholesalers. On average, there are 35 different products in our deliveries, and these 35 products are being manufactured by roughly 20 different manufacturers. So this very well shows the bundling function actually also in terms of ecological aspects that pharmaceutical wholesalers have. And our members have some 140,000 employees throughout Europe, ensuring that the patients do get their medicines at the right time and at the right place. So when it comes to the pharmaceutical strategy, could you please move on to the next slide? We as full-line healthcare distributors identified 3 essential axes that are of great importance for us. And I just start with the top lines. It's the recognition of the role of the full-service healthcare distributors, the fair and monitored implementation of the existing regulation, and Ilaria already touched at addressing the issue of medicine shortages at European level. A very important topic, used to be the most important one from our perspective before pandemic hit us, but it's still on top of our list, to be honest. So actually, it should be very clear that pharmaceutical wholesalers should be part of the critical infrastructure, but this was not clear when the coronavirus hit Europe, actually. So in many countries, we had to struggle for our members being recognized as part of the critical infrastructure. But since wholesalers have proven to be a very, very important and resilient part of the supply of European citizens with goods of daily need, I think it must be clear that wholesalers are part of the critical infrastructure. Of course, having certain rights, but also certain obligations. I'll come back to that a little bit later on. And of course, fulfilling a public service function also means that the financial viability of full service healthcare distribution needs to be improved for the long-term resilience of healthcare systems, of course. We see that in some European countries already. The margins that have been granted to wholesalers were very low. There were austerity measures and margins have been constantly cut to extents that actually did not allow to keep the service level that is required and that is expected by the public, to be honest. But again, we see a move in the right direction, actually. And we also think that wholesalers can fulfill an important function when it comes to the question of national stockpiling, when it comes to the question of emergency stocks. So we really wish to, or we would propose to evaluate the capability of full service healthcare distributors as the providers of the right infrastructure for stockpiling measures for emergency preparedness. And I can tell you that in many countries, discussions about this topic already started. So here in Austria, in my country, I'm part of a working group at our NCA discussing exactly these possibilities that pharmaceutical wholesalers can offer when it comes to emergency stocks. So if we move on to the second axe or the second pillar, which is the fair and monitored implementation of existing regulation, we would ask for accurate interpretation, implementation, and enforcement of Article 81, Paragraph 2 of the Directive 2001/83/EC in the national legislation to provide for an auditable and enforceable right for healthcare distributors to be appropriately and continuously supplied. So that's a long sentence. What does it mean? In short words, actually, we would like to have the right to buy all products that are necessary to fulfill our full service function from the manufacturers. This is not the case. There are existing regulations in some countries, France, for instance, or Germany, already implemented this right for full service healthcare distributors. In other countries like mine in Austria, it is a joint obligation for the manufacturer and the wholesaler to supply the public. But this often leads to the fact that manufacturers, with excluding wholesalers, supply pharmacies directly. And that in the long run actually puts our business model at risk, because if we are not entitled to buy products from manufacturers anymore, we cannot be, or we can in the long run not call ourselves full service healthcare distributors anymore. And I think especially in the pandemic, it turned out that our function is a very important one for public health, and therefore we ask for the right to be supplied by manufacturers, which does not mean that manufacturers should not be allowed to deliver directly to public pharmacies, but we would call for the right to also buy products from them. So, and this is a stack concept, would actually need the precondition of a general revision of the wholesale distribution licensing system, because currently there is no distinction between full service healthcare distributors that hold full stocks and have a certain range of products and a certain volume, and what we call shortliners or healthcare distributors that only concentrate on a small range of products for whatever reasons. So this is crucial for us to have a distinct license saying that a certain enterprise is a full line wholesaler, with the consequence of having certain obligations, but also certain rights, like the right to be supplied by manufacturers. Of course, there is essential information sharing, serving for the exclusive purposes of supplying medicines in times of crisis, and limited to what is strictly necessary, should be temporarily exempted from certain regulation prohibitions and data protection laws. So we are willing to disclose our data under certain preconditions, of course. as we realize that this is needed also for politicians to make the right decisions in terms of crisis. During the pandemic in Germany, for instance, wholesalers constantly reported stock levels and availabilities of certain critical medicines to the German Ministry of Health. And I think this is a good example of how it could work. And of course, we are willing to contribute, not generally saying that we would like to disclose all our data, because it sometimes also contains commercial secrets that would influence competition. And I guess competition, of course, is needed in the sector, as well as it is needed in all other sectors to facilitate development towards digitalization, for instance, in our sector. But again, we would be willing to disclose certain information that are needed to ensure the supply of the public. And the third axe that is very important, I've been mentioning that already, that this was a huge, or the biggest topic actually before Corona hit Europe, is the topic of shortages. We do think that there needs to be an approach on European level. I guess EMA and the heads of medicines agencies, the working group, already has very good approaches and very good drafts. There was a tendency towards generally limiting the free flow of goods in Europe, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. I guess you all heard the stories that transports of personal protective equipment have been stopped in certain countries because there was a need for masks, for disinfectants, for ventilators, for whatever. So especially at the beginning, before we managed to introduce the green line for pharmaceuticals, there were many problems, and even especially small countries like Austria, for instance, we don't have or very few manufacturing sites. We depend on warehouses that are abroad, and at the beginning it was very difficult to get the goods that we need, the pharmaceuticals, in the country. So there is a big need to ensure that free flow of goods throughout Europe is only limited under very strict preconditions, actually, and only temporarily. So therefore, we call for only allowing temporary restrictions to the free movement of medicines through controls of parallel exports, if they are in conformity with a set of clear recommendations and for specific listed products. So when it comes to the set of recommendations, there is a very good list or set of preconditions that EMA already, or the Commission already set out some 2 years ago, I think, and this is what we very much support, because we think it is a good set of preconditions, and we would very much like to see this implemented in the pharmaceutical strategy as well. So what we also think is urgently needed is introducing a legal basis for a European-wide early warning system for anticipated and existing shortages, involving all supply chain stakeholders, the national competent authorities, and also EMA. So I guess you are aware that throughout Europe there are many systems in place already, but what we call for and what we think is most important, that you need to take up signals from the market, because in most of the countries it is the case that shortages lists only depend on reports by manufacturers. I mean, there are best practice examples like the Netherlands, for instance. Spain is going into that direction, that already implement systems, signals from the market, and also early warning systems in their collection of data about shortages. But we think that this should also be implemented on a European level to enable EMA to get an overview about the existing supply situation in Europe. And there was a study carried out by IQVIA a few months ago saying that shortages, there are very, very little shortages that occur throughout the whole of Europe, and many of them are regional, which actually points out that our request for the free movement of goods is even more important, because if there is a local shortage and if there is enough stock in other regions, they can easily be shifted, or they should be able to be shifted from one country or one region to another to ensure the continuous supply. So, and last but not least, the pharmaceutical strategy should address the significant differences in shortages monitoring and reporting and monitoring across EU and member states, and implement a EU-wide harmonized categories also for root causes of shortages. Not only the reporting itself, but also the set of root causes should be harmonized, because only if this is the case, you can get an overview and a better feeling about the supply chain and the supply situation throughout Europe. So I guess this was it in a nutshell for a moment, and any questions warmly welcome. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bernd. For the sake of time, perhaps we will move on to the next speaker, Mathieu Huin. Will you share your screen?
No, I have no slides, but thank
okay,
you very
no problem.
much. You hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you very much for inviting me to this roundtable. I'm really pleased to present the Sanofi perspective on the European pharmaceutical strategy. Very briefly, Sanofi is a French company which has a long-standing presence in Europe in R&D and manufacturing, both medicines and vaccines. The pandemic has emphasized the need to address Europe's health resilience and global competitiveness in pharmaceutical R&D and manufacturing. And as such, Sanofi welcomes the European pharmaceutical strategy because it will be key to adopt measures needed to strengthen both competitiveness and resilience globally. So today, I'd like to cover 3 areas of particular interest of this pharma strategy. First, security of supply. So how Europe could strengthen its supply channels and address its areas of greatest dependence. Second, access to innovation. So how Europe could strengthen its ability to bring innovation to all patients. And last, R&D and manufacturing ecosystem, how to build an ecosystem of excellence for R&D and manufacturing. So regarding security of supply, pandemic crisis has shed light on European dependency to other geography for the supply of essential medicines. And it also revealed the important concentration of the API, active pharmaceutical ingredient production. So in order to build a more robust and resilient supply chain, we think that Europe should ensure first the presence of a sufficient number of suppliers on the market and make sure they do not rely all on the same API source. This is the first point. The second is that we need to prioritize. It's unrealistic to reshore all the pharmaceutical industry in Europe, but we need to act and identify and reinforce the most vulnerable supply chain. And last, we should take appropriate measures to improve supply chain resilience in order to facilitate the management of supply tensions. So how to do it in practice? We think authorities and procurement bodies should work together with industries to put in place public procurement processes that guarantee market sustainability and ultimately safeguard multiple suppliers with geographically diverse API sourcing, which is really key considering the API concentration. This means encouraging multi-awardee and multi-criteria tenders with tender criteria that positively incentivize supply capabilities, innovation, environmental footprint, and societal responsibility. Then to be better prepared, Europe should identify the most critical supply chains and act to reinforce them. Concretely, Europe should establish criteria to define the most critical medicines based on the public health needs and the dependency on ex-Europe manufacturers. This will contribute to focus plan and emergency measures. European manufacturing capacity should also be mapped, and API manufacturing in the European Union should be supported through first, the adequate market condition based on sustainable procurement system, as I briefly described previously, but also through direct financial support focused on driving innovation, digital transformation, and raising environmental standards. And last, in case of crisis, we need to improve drug supply chain resilience. To do so, one common European packaging per presentation should be accepted by regulators of all member states for the essential medicine. Paper product information leaflet could be replaced by an electronic one, especially for drugs that are administered by healthcare professionals. And we should harmonize the national regulatory requirements, especially those related to the serialization. All these measures would allow to swiftly reallocate drugs from a country to another in case of supply shortage. Then, regarding innovation, Europe should strengthen its ability to bring innovation to all patients through an attractive and sustainable ecosystem. To this extent, it's essential the review of the OMP regulation remain focused on strengthening its positive impact on stimulating research into treatment for rare disease. Besides, pragmatic solutions are needed for faster access to innovative drugs. In particular, implementation of novel pricing and payment models should be facilitated, and we should open the debate on solidarity-based pricing approaches. And last point, to be better prepared for the future, we consider it's really critical that Europe strengthen its innovation ecosystem in R&D and manufacturing, especially in view of global competition of China and the US, who are investing strongly. And to do so, it requires to maintain a strong IP and incentive framework, to streamline the regulatory processes, increase the acceptance of real-world evidence data, increase investment toward for the transition toward innovative manufacturing strategies. To conclude and sum up, European pharmaceutical strategy should focus on securing supply of current medicines, accelerating access to innovation to all patients, and building a strong R&D and manufacturing ecosystem for the future. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any question.
And thank you to you, Mathieu, for this complete package of requests for the pharmaceutical strategy. We have, in the meantime, we have a question in the chat, and perhaps you can answer this question. It is about that there are a lot of good and efficient medicines outside of Europe. Why are they hard to get in Europe?
So it's really
a regulatory question. Why are they difficult to access when they are available in the US or on Asian markets?
Yeah, I think a key aspect is the incentive, and pricing is key here. We know that we need to have a price that reward innovation, so we are really supporting value-based pricing, and we need to have countries that invest enough in health. So there are things to do to improve access and equity in access. This is undisputable. But we need to make sure to have a price that reward value. To ensure better access in all countries, I think we should implement more value-based contracting. So it would allow to have to be sure to pay for the value in health that we bring. So it's a first way to be more efficient and then reduce in average the price of medicine. And second, we need to open the debate on equity-based tier pricing, meaning that we should anchor the principle in European Union that the wealthier country pays more than the poorer ones. And it's a way to accelerate access in the poorer countries. Currently, there is an international reference pricing system, which force, in the end, pharmaceutical industry to adapt the time of launch in the different countries, because a lot of money is lost if we launch the product in all countries at the same time. So it's not an easy topic, but there are ways to deal with it.
Thank you very much, Mathieu. Now I see there are more questions coming in, but perhaps before tackling them, we would now also give Soren the chance to make his contribution.
Yes, thank you very much. So I'm delighted to be part of this panel. I think it's a very important topic for Europe to have a strong pharmaceutical industry. I think this is one of the industries that can really make a difference globally, not only for patient health, but also for growth and value creation in Europe as such. I represent Novo Holdings and the Novo Nordisk Foundation, and we are part of the Novo Group. We have a controlling ownership in the pharmaceutical company Novo Nordisk and the bioindustrial company Novozymes. In holdings, we focus on investments in life sciences. So we have, I think, more than 140 portfolio companies developing drugs and innovative solutions for patients. In the Novo Nordisk Foundation, we donate all the profits that is made from our investments to science and primarily in the Nordics, I would say. And therefore, I think, and my role, maybe I should say, is I manage the early stage investment team in Novo Holdings. So we identify academic innovations, license them out of the university, and take a very high risk in identifying and funding, turning these innovations into potential companies. We have been doing this for almost 15 years. Today we have, I think, 25 plus portfolio companies that we have all built and funded out of academic research. And you know, from that perspective, the SMEs play a crucial role in the pharmaceutical value chain. One sort of number that is good to remember is that more than half of drugs approved by the FDA in the US, they actually originate out of biotech companies and then are acquired by big pharma like Sanofi that takes them the rest of the way across the final FDA approval and gets them across to patients. And this whole value chain, I would say, relies on what you could call the biotech social contract. And that is that it costs on average maybe 1 billion euros to bring a drug to the market. And that's only the successful ones. And along the way, many of them are lost, and investors like ourselves, we lose all our money. And sometimes we hand it off to Sanofi before they must realize that this drug does not hold up its original promise. But anyway, this is a funnel and a value chain. And in the end, this whole industry is based on the fact that innovations can be protected by patents, and that innovative drugs that make a big difference for patients are priced accordingly. So the social biotech, the social contract is that novel and innovative drugs are value-based priced as long as the patents are alive, and when they go generic, they are more accessible to the whole global population. And when the 10-15 years I've been active in this sector, I have seen that Europe was behind many countries, especially the US, but we are actually catching up now. We see money pouring in from investors into European startups. And this is a very, very promising development that we need to make sure that the pharmaceutical strategy continues to support. We also see from a competitive perspective that China is accelerating. So it's not only to protect our own industry, it's to make sure that European innovations and science are translated into companies and solutions for patients that will eventually drive a lot of value in the society, but also growth and solve problems for patients. I will give you two examples of a functioning economic model and one that's not functioning. So of course, you know, the COVID crisis was, in my view, an excellent example of public-private partnerships that sort of brought a vaccine to patients in less than a year from the discovery of the actual virus. I think this is a moonshot achievement and would not have been, achieved unless it had been for biotech. This whole value chain that I just described. Keep in mind that this mRNA technology that is behind Moderna's and BioNTech's vaccines have been more than 10 years, maybe 12 years, maybe 15 years under development. Billions have put into this. And we are super fortunate that that technology was available exactly at the right time. There's a lot of course, we need to secure access for the vaccines to the global population. This is not a pricing issue, in my view. It's more a supply chain issue that we discussed previously. I'll give you another example that was mentioned by the first speaker, and that is novel antibiotics. So we have all heard about the antibiotic resistant crisis. Healthy people get infected by superbugs that are resistant to all known antibiotics. And there's not much that we can do about it. And one of the reasons is that the economic model of developing novel antibiotics is broken. So there has not been significantly new antibiotics developed over the previous 10, maybe 20 years. And that is because it's not a financially viable value proposition to invest in biotech companies that are developing these products. In Novo Holdings, we have actually allocated 1 billion Danish kroner, 150 million euros to do exactly that. Invest in early innovation for novel antibiotics. We have participated in what's called the AMR Action Fund, which is a global initiative by big pharma and several foundations to bring. Our own initiative invest in innovation, and the AMR Action Fund brings some of these products through to market. But we have seen that companies with functioning antibiotics ready to launch them on the market, they go bankrupt because the payment system is not there to make it an attractive business model to launch these products. And therefore, if you don't have a functioning financial ecosystem, you take the incentive away to develop these new drugs, and you simply won't have any. And there was one question earlier about approvals why aren't these drugs available in Europe? And we actually did some statistics some while back, and the few products that have been developed, they are not launched in Europe because it's not financially viable to market them. So in my view, the pharmaceutical value chain is one of a lot of opportunity, a lot of innovation, and a lot of growth potential for Europe. And we need to make sure that it it is supported or it is not, it's supported through the value chain. And it goes from early academic innovation, how it translates into potential startup companies, all the way to pharmacies and distribution, like we've heard about today. Otherwise, it will not, benefit patients. But so a value chain is not stronger than its weakest point. And there's a tremendous opportunity to generate not only value for patients, but also for society in form of successful companies, jobs, and solutions that will benefit society. And I'll end there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. This was really interesting. And I think at least I have learned a lot about the novel antibiotics. I didn't know that they are not viable to be marketed. Thank you. And with that, we pass on to our last panelist to make it round. And I would like to give the floor to Mikas Rimantas from Lithuania.
Okay, hello. Thank you for inviting me here. Can you hear? Everything's okay?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, I'll try to share a presentation and then maybe see how it goes. Okay. So let me go to the beginning, and then let me just shortly introduce my idea, what I would like to say to commend the pharmaceutical strategy of Europe. And basically, we have reviewed the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe, and we think this is a very good moment to have our area of business, or the area that we are working, to make it strategic, to have this parallel trade finally not the small minor business, but to make it strategic tool for implementing pharmaceutical strategy for Europe. And I'll tell you why in presenting my views. Basically, research that we have been doing on the shortages, and I think the parallel trade could be used as a tool in implementing the more resilient European supply chain. So just short introduction on the parallel market in Baltics, 3 countries, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And my company, the company that I represent, is one of the bigger importers in Lithuania. And also we started a business in Estonia, also addressing the shortage issues, which was the problem for the small country. The parallel import as such is not some big business. On the Europe-wide, it's about 2.5% and 3% of the whole pharmaceutical trade or wholesale business. And this business relies on the different demands and different pricing situations in different markets, which allows us to bring together demand and supply, being flexible and being very listening to the market needs. So just to tell, we are not competing with manufacturers, we are not competing with wholesalers. We're doing a small niche business which finalizes and connects the points where the lines does not connect. So just from our perspective, the top origin for Lithuania was Germany, Romania, and Netherlands, which could be questioned why you're buying from expensive countries. And this is clearly different products at differently priced in different countries. And that makes a reason why this business works. And just to show, Germany is the top destination country for us. So that means we get products from many European countries, and then we redistribute on demand to the many other clients, because there is some gap between what is demanded and what is supplied. So the parallel trade advantages are that we use multi-country approach. It differs from manufacturers which focus on manufacturing, registration of the product. We focus on logistics, and we try to balance our supply and demand sides to achieve this connection of lines. We are highly effective, and basically we cannot afford losing products in our logistics. We try to focus on the small batches because the supply of bigger batches is not possible for parallel import. We are minimizing all of the costs, including regulatory, overhead, manufacturing, marketing, and all of the parallel import businesses are focusing on problems, and the problems that are raising in the local markets. So basically, we are listening to clients, and we try to solve the problems that are existent. And just to mention, there are many good examples in Lithuania, Bulgaria, Romania, where the parallel importers are solving the exact problems that are not solved by manufacturers and the full line wholesalers. So I want to mention 3 A's of parallel trade, which we maybe understand differently from what the pharmaceutical strategy is saying. We have 3 A's for availability, accessibility, and affordability. Just to mention shortly, availability, we understand when the product is available, registered and manufactured, developed by the manufacturer. But it could be the situation that the product is registered, but it's not accessible to the patient. So the product cannot reach the final customer or patient in the pharmacy, and this demand is not addressed somehow, or it's too small to be addressed by the big companies. So small and medium enterprises can really tackle this accessibility issue when the product is registered in one country, but not distributed in another. And also affordability as such, which is, let's say, always a matter of choice. So bringing the choice to the patient, bringing the cheaper medicines gives the flexibility for the patients and the social insurance funds to finance that. This is extremely important for the small countries. Products are not being registered in small countries. We have different availability in Lithuania in comparison to Germany, let's say, or France. Products are not delivered even at when the products are registered at the European scale. They are not being delivered to Lithuania, or the delivery is delayed, and the prices are higher due to manufacturing scale. The small countries need repackaging, and products need to be prepared for local languages and so on. And that is this all 3 A's lead to the problems that are not really addressed and are left to the patients. So we have these problems with TBC, warfarin, ranexin, epilepsy drugs, adrenaline injectors, antidotes. Those products are not supplied to our markets. And the only way is to go to the bigger market, take the product, repack it, prepare it for the market, and supply it to the local market. And this is what we can do effectively. And we believe this should be a strategic choice of the national agencies to solve the problems. We see that the parallel trade could be a strategic tool because it solves and benefits many stakeholders. We believe that this could be useful for manufacturers. And 4 years ago, I was presenting this idea to the manufacturers in London, and I have positive feedback about that yes, sometimes it's not economical to produce small batches, and parallel import is perfect tool, even though not used fully, to deliver small batches to small countries. Also, let's say environmental thing, avoiding destruction of overstocks could be really tackled and solved by the parallel import. To mention generic products from other countries, we don't have many manufacturers, generic manufacturers in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, so we really have to rely on the generic manufacturers in other countries who do not really approach our markets. Just to mention shortages of pharmaceuticals, and this is an important topic for, let's say, 5 years or maybe more, which become really an issue. And other speakers already mentioned that there is no unified reporting system. So, and just we have made some research on the country, on Germany, let's say, and we found that the most of the shortage and supply problems are relating to manufacturing problems, because in Germany, marketing authorization holders have to state what is the problem. So this is the research we have done, and more importantly, we have researched how this, let's say, 51% of with no alternative, local alternative in the market, how it could be solved, and there is always a parallel alternative in another market. So even the manufacturers themselves state how could be the problem of shortage be solved. They state parallel import could be, a solution for that. So we also made a geographical research on shortages. So 3 countries that we have investigated that 66% of the shortages were problem just in one country. 24 shortages were regional issues, so we could not supply from these countries. And 9% of shortages were European-wide problem. That leads to the conclusion that 90% of the shortages, regional shortages, could be solved by supplying from other European countries. And this is, I think, the very important thing. We also worked with national competent authority in Estonia to introduce parallel import and to maybe relax some regulations, local regulations. And we have analyzed the shortage problem in Estonia, and we found 129 shortages that do not have alternatives locally. So these need to be replaced by something. And our research led to conclusion that even though in one market we see the shortage, there is always an alternative in another market. Would it be Lithuania, just nearby country, or it could be Netherlands, which would totally fill the problem and with no problems, or even like looking further, when the product is not available in Estonia, we could fill that with a Greek stock. So that would not be an issue for such a big market. So 98% of shortages could have been solved by parallel import from European Union. And that led to national competent authority to ease the regulations in Estonia, which allowed us to start registering product like parallel import products. So coming back to policies that we support, and I think this is the most important slide to detail our points, is that parallel import would further improve 3 A's, what we spoke: accessibility, affordability, and availability. So parallel import, if seen as strategic tool, could solve such issues as deferral, non-launch, removal from the markets. Also, having unified, transparent, and non-discriminatory policies for reimbursement could be the solution, which leads more parallel import coming to the market. we see parallel import as being even more effective dealing with shortages. And I would agree with Bernd that PCO, like public service obligation for marketing authorization holders, need to be enforced and extended, meaning that we have to deal with overstocks, not shortages in the market. Having this policy really is about having social responsibility or corporate profitability. So politicians and at European level have to decide what is more important, social responsibility of marketing authorization holders or their corporate profitability. And we support having overstocks and maybe having parallel import solution for that. And also some regulatory procedures which need to be simplified. Some countries just do not accept having these products under Article 126, which is totally nice tool for that. And also, once again, parallel import could bring the value to all European stakeholders, as I mentioned, including manufacturers, wholesalers, and pharmacists, and the social, like health insurance funds. So my call and my main message is that this is the perfect time to have this tool empowered and really working to increase and advance the resilience of European supply chains. And parallel import, parallel trade could solve economic, social, and environmental aspects of this problem. So thank you for your attention, and I welcome questions.
Thank you, Mika, for your presentation. Yes, in the meantime, we received some questions. Please do use the Q&A function instead of the chat. It's easier for us to have them all together. But before going to the questions, I would like to hand over or hand back again to Ms. Weiss, whether she has some questions or some comments to what she has heard.
Thank you so much. We are right now checking our amendments if we cover already the topics put forward, and it seems as we do. That is brilliant. So thank you for that. We also had on the chat a conversation on the water and the urban wastewater framework directive. So we tackled that one. The latter on the parallel import and parallel trade is also a discourse atomic bomb sometimes. So I would like to appreciate if we in the debate could address the pros and cons, also lessons learned from the parallel trading system in the past and how we can go forward in the future. I will be very curious to get some inspiration on that one also from other of the panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, perhaps we ask a tour de table of our panelists what they think about the lessons learned in respect of parallel trade, which was the question of Ms. Weiss.
I can try, Søren. So I must say, I am not an expert in parallel trade, but I thought it was some good logics that you sort of put forward, because that you know, there may be surplus in some geographies and a lack of supply in others, and I think it seems like a good business model to get access to that and try to even out some of the inequalities there. I think my question is that reflection is that when we look at the pharmaceutical sector in the US compared to Europe, you know, in the US you have one regulatory body and one market where you can launch your products and go through one regulatory process. And I was wondering whether some of the issues in supply would be addressed not only from the pricing and perspective, but also from the regulatory perspective, so that we don't have, when companies go to market and launch their products, needs to go through 25 different regulatory processes, but only a few. And it's I don't know how much that plays into the parallel process or parallel import issue, but I think it's definitely a difference that we see from the small companies going to market. They often choose US because it's a bigger market with less effort.
Yeah,
I can comment
you
on
wanted
that.
to have, yeah.
Yeah, I think I already mentioned in my presentation that we cannot afford not to use every tool that is at our hand to overcome shortages. And if you take a look at it from the European perspective, parallel trade is just a shift of existing products from one member state to another. So in the end, always a European citizen is supplied, and the overall volume of packs that are available for the patients does not change. And as I mentioned, that there are clear studies saying that shortages often are regionally. And I guess in this case, parallel trade is an appropriate tool to overcome regional shortages. Of course, this should not lead to creating shortages in other regions, but I guess that it is our joint responsibility to take care for that. And in the end, it's always better to shift the pack to another region than to destroy it in the end because it expired. So I guess that's the clear position. It should be under control, and it should help to solve regional problems, and therefore it is good the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernd. Anyone else on the parallel trade?
Maybe I can react. So
Yes.
I think parallel trade and the arguments Mikas bring forward, especially regarding the regulatory harmonization, are really meaningful. It's really important to go toward more harmonization between the different member states. Then looking at the impact on shortages and the risk of supply tension, I think an important aspect is to put in place a governance, or at least a platform where industries and regulators can speak and also manage the supply within Europe. Because parallel trade, if it's dealt by a private entities, it may not have the full picture of where are the stocks in Europe. It's important that regulators and manufacturers have visibility. And maybe my message is to prevent shortages. One important aspect is predictability. And we need to improve the predictability in terms of supply demand. And in order for the manufacturers to better allocate the dose, and also to better invest in the increase in supply capabilities.
Thank you very much. If there is not an urgent other comment on the parallel trade, I would rather, Ilaria, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, so indeed the parallel trade is very controversial. Also among our members, I can openly say that for some members it's an important part of their market, for example in Sweden, while other members consider that parallel trade can cause problems in terms of access to medicine, critical medicines. So as a PGU, as an umbrella organization, we don't have a very clear-cut position on this, because we have to take into account of the different impact that parallel trade has on the different markets. However, we think that it's important to give member states further guidance at European level on the import and exports of medicines, but also medical devices across border as a response to the occurring shortages of medicines. So we need to ensure that the flows of medicines and medical devices is better regulated, better planned, and better coordinated, especially in crisis situation like the one we experienced, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, and that the coordination and these criteria respond to the patient needs and not necessarily to commercial strategies.
Thank you, Ilaria, for that. We go perhaps to the first question from the audience. It's from Peter Rübig, who is asking, how can we get a fair value chain with digital globalization? Can anyone answer to him?
Maybe I can start. So it's quite a broad topic, but I think the digital transition has a very important role to play in health, and it can have a very positive impact all along the value chain of health system. It can accelerate R&D, accelerate access, because health data are key. I mentioned the value-based contracting or innovative contracting mechanism. They need to rely on health data, but it can also help to increase efficiency of the health system, have better patient pathway, increase the ambulatory care. There is a rise of the telemedicine, and all these aspects can be a huge source of saving and efficiency. So we need really not to fail this transition. And as such, the European health data space is really a key initiative. We need to make sure that we implement high standard quality for the health electronic health records. We make sure the database are interoperable from a country to another in Europe, but also with other countries globally. And last, we need to make sure private actors have access to this health data.
Thank you very much. And then there is a question on, I think this one is addressed to Ms. Weiss. The draft rapporteur in ENVI mentions a better use of joint procurement for better preparedness and equitable access. In times of crisis, such as the COVID pandemic, how do you see the use of advanced purchase agreements by the EU to purchase medicines beyond vaccines to ensure faster and equitable access for patients?
Oh, that was actually, thank you for the question. It was actually also a question of myself, because yes, we see that in the draft in the ENRI report. More coming from my political family, to have joint procurement on a crisis situation can make so much sense, and it did. It showed, luckily. But I'm a little hesitant to open up the scope of joint procurements, as I learned from my network that will actually not speed up the availability of the medicine to the citizens. So it's a kind of a false, it's a myth that joint procurement is actually speeding up the access of medicine to the citizens. So if that is true, then I don't actually see a point in opening the scope also to emergency and to unmet therapeutical needs. But I'm still open for arguments on those two specific possibilities. I don't see joint procurement as a one tool fits all procurement types, but maybe in the emergency and also in the unmet therapeutical needs, there could be a possibility. It's not doing any good to my gut feeling about the principle, because I am who I am with my political viewpoint. But I would like to hear from the skilled and experts who know better than I do.
So, who would like to answer or give the opinion on the joint procurement?
I think at least I can give a perspective. I think in my view, the reason why the joint procurement worked so well for COVID vaccines was because these were drugs that were not yet developed. Nobody knew which ones would be successful. And the fact that governments globally or healthcare systems were putting up their hand and saying, we want to buy before you have actually developed these drugs, provided the right incentive to go and invest in factories and allocate capacity and all of that at risk to rush to develop these new vaccines. So at least that's from my view why it worked for the COVID vaccine and accelerated access and development.
Maybe I can add something to Soren's comments.
Yeah.
I totally agree with the specificity of the joint procurement for COVID-19 vaccine. I think it was really about also driving investment and accelerating investment on the development of vaccines. And the other important aspect is that we were and we still are in a situation where supply capabilities were limited, and we needed to have an equal access among Europe, among the different member states. So in this very specific situation, I think joint procurement was very useful. Then in a more general framework, I think there might be unintended consequences of joint procurement. So for a drug that is on the market, we need to see how to deal with the national procurement, because we need to have visibility, and could brings finally supply constraints by reducing the number of suppliers in Europe. The main argument to develop joint procurement is about affordability, about decreasing price. So to echo what I said earlier, if the only focus is on price reduction, you can have really unintended consequences on the number of suppliers, and you may lead to further concentration on production outside of Europe. And other food for thought, I would say, you need also to decide which product you want to procure. And it can limit the freedom of prescription. And in all countries, physicians have not all the same way to care, and they don't use the same product. So there are a lot of aspects to consider when talking about joint procurement. And the last, regarding access for innovative medicine, we are strongly in favor of value-based pricing. If you implement it at European level, it means that you need to define a price for countries that have very different ability to pay. So you may expect to have longer price negotiation, and that may end up with, in average, a price that would be higher for the poorest country and maybe lower for the wealthier one. So we may also question the equity aspect of joint procurement.
Thank you for your contributions. I just see that unfortunately time is up. It passed much faster than we realized. I would like to warmly thank our panelists for their great contributions, and you, Ms. Weiss, for your questions and the introduction, and good luck for writing up now the report and the amendments.